What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Spectator Sports. I'm your host, Sebastian Fonseca. As always, before we get into recapping the action across the NFL for Week 2, please do me a massive favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. You can also get the audio from this episode on Spotify, and all links are in the description. Plus, a playlist has been made for you guys if you want to catch clips from this episode in shorter formats as well. Like I said, links are in the description. Lamar advances to 3-1 over division rival Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals. Since these two have overlapped in the NFL, it's favored the Baltimore Ravens, despite both of these two players not being fully available to see them twice a year. So this has been a little bit of a rare thing to see. Either Lamar has been hurt or Joe Burrow has been hurt. Thankfully, we got to see them in an early Week 2 clash, this time in Cincinnati. Baltimore has looked pretty solid despite numerous injuries. I mean, we're talking about two missing key pieces on the offensive line, Ronnie Stanley and Tyler Lindenbaum. Those are two integral pieces for that O-line. Plus, in the secondary, you have Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Williams. Those are Pro Bowl caliber players on a habitual year, and the fact that they're able to go in and also bottle up this supposedly high potent Cincinnati Bengals pass catching room, especially Jamar Chase, who we'll get into a little bit later, this is pretty good. A road win, first time on the road, divisional foe. Ravens are looking pretty good despite missing key pieces. And to add on to that, they had Odell for a little bit, and then he left the game due to an ankle injury in the second half. And I don't know if that injury is going to be super serious. It seems that he'll be back for Week 3, but that's something to keep an eye out for. Let's talk about Lamar. Lamar didn't have the best of games in the first game against the Houston Texans, and even in the first half, not the greatest, but second half definitely recovered, and they're finally utilizing ways to get Zay Flowers the ball. There was this feature, especially on this one drive, where they lofted a deep pass to him for like 60 yards and then used him in a couple of gadget plays. He couldn't get into the end zone for his first touchdown, but still, it's nice to see that they're utilizing him not in just the passing game, but the short passing game, motion, whatever it may be. He's like their Kadarius Toney, or they're just their gadget player in their offense. Todd Monken, new OC, already implementing things. I would like to see the running game get going a little bit more consistently, but at least throwing the ball, this is one of the more consistent things I've seen out of Lamar this year in terms of just not abandoning the pass, going for a run, which he can do. He's super fast and elusive, but him developing as a passer this year is just another thing to add to his arsenal in his toolkit, and we're seeing that. I mean, this wide receiving room is deceptively deep. We talked about OBJ, but he was out for this game, so that meant Zay Flowers had to step up. We saw Nelson Aguilar score a touchdown, and they still have Rashad Bateman, who'll be coming back at some point, Duvernay as well. Adding in Mark Andrews, who finally made his season debut. This offense is looking pretty good in the passing attack, and once these O-linemen gets back into the fold, that running game is going to open up for Gus Edwards, who will be taking over the bulk of the carries as J.K. Dobbins is out due to that torn Achilles. I hate that for him. Yes, it hasn't been the greatest to start the first couple of weeks, but this offense is going to take some time, and you know, it's the first month, especially with teams that don't have a lot of preseason action. It takes time to implement, especially the starters who didn't play that much outside of maybe some joint practices in training camp. You know, you're going to get some growing pains the first 6 weeks of the season, but we'll see that transition hopefully in October. For the Bengals, 0-2 start off the year yet again. Disappointing, and this 0-2 start feels different. Why? The offense doesn't look that good. Jamar Chase in particular. Through 2 games, he has a measly 70 yards, and they're all short around the line of scrimmage. It's just depending on him to get by defenders, and I don't like how they're utilizing him. A lot of this offense is quick passes to the outside or quick outs, and trying to burn them deep. You don't see a lot of motion with this offense, and on top of it, the running game has been relatively silent, and that's again coming back to this offensive line woes that we've seen out of Cincinnati. Joe Burrow has struggled to start this year. I know he's trying to get us to relax, but he tweaked this calf injury too. And with next week, the LA Rams are coming into town. They have a really good defensive line that should shred this Bengals O-line once again, and if Joe is not available. 0-3 is looking straight at them. And they're already 2 games behind. I'm not saying their season is done. There's plenty of time. We can relax. But it's going to be a lot more of a fight just to get into the playoff mix, because now you're down 0-2 in your division, and this is their home game you lost to the Ravens. So you have to travel to Baltimore later this season, and you can't rely on Lamar getting hurt in November, December. I expect Lamar to be more consistent, especially be available, and I think the Ravens are off to a good start. They're only going to get better once his offense begins to fully mesh. Travis Kelce and Chris Jones, they both made their season debut over in Jacksonville for a Week 2 matchup against the Jaguars, and both of them made impacts early. I mean, Chris Jones, he had 1.5 sacks, didn't miss a beat from his playoff run. Yes, he was on a pitch count due to conditioning issues because he didn't play during the training camp period, but I'm sure it's going to be a slow implementation, but he's very effective even on a pitch count. You talk about Travis Kelce, red zone threat, one of the best receiving tight ends of all time. Just him being out there puts eyeballs. Defenders are going to be looking every which way. Where is 87 on that field? And yes, this offense with Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, it's going to be a work in progress. Right now, they're still not as crisp as I like. That right tackle right now, looking a little susceptible. There's a lot of pressure coming off that right side, right in Mahomes' face. Thankfully, he's one of the most elusive quarterbacks in this league, for looking for passes downfield. So that's a big key part right there. It's just that battle, right? Because Eric Bieniemy left, and Andy Reid now is without Eric Bieniemy. We're trying to see who was right or whose offense was it really. Right now, it's looking like Eric Bieniemy is off to a decent start in DC, but obviously it's a very loaded team here in Kansas City. I fully expect the Chiefs to respond and get a little bit more crisp as the season wears on. There's still some things I'd like them to fix. I mean, like I talked about protection-wise, but they emphasized Kadarius Toney, who had the case of the yips on opening night, but at least he was featured on a drive. That's good to see. Sky Moore made a key impact in a deep pass caught in the fourth quarter to really ice the game right there. And once this running game gets implemented too, I think the Kansas City Chiefs will be that juggernaut that we're used to. But right now, they're leaning on defense because Steve Spagnuolo and this defensive unit has played really well to start the first 2 games. Even without Chris Jones, going back at the tape, they did a pretty good job in containing the Lions for the most part. They got loose a couple times, and possibly that's the reason why they lost, but they did the best that they could without their defensive anchor. Now that he's back and he's getting onboarded again, they're going to look like they'll be leaning on defense to start off this year. The secondary, we pick on them a lot, but thanks to good coaching by Spags, Calvin Ridley had a stellar game in week 1, very quiet in week 2. Evan Ingram, not the biggest impact. They loaded the box on Travis Etienne. Did a good job there. To flip over to the Jacksonville side, I think this was a missed opportunity. It just shows that the Jags aren't just there yet. They are closing the gap. They've looked pretty competitive against the Chiefs their last 2 matchups, both by 1 possession games. But you got to finish the deal. Getting shut out in terms of not getting a touchdown against the Kansas City Chiefs defense is a knock on this highly potent offense that we're talking about, right? Too many weapons, too much talent, and lack of execution. They missed a golden chance to get that lead up a lot higher than it was. Settling for 3 off a muff punt isn't going to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. You got to cash in on those red zone trips, and they were 0 for 3. It's a big difference. 2 field goals could have been touchdowns. We're talking about a whole different ball game. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence was charged with a fumble. I did see it was a backward pass and it wasn't caught by Jamal Agnew. The fumble was given to Trevor Lawrence, but it's not really his fault entirely there. That's a 50-50 bang-bang play. But we have to talk about ball security. Those turnovers are big, key situational errors by the Jags shows that they're just a young team still learning to win on an elite level in this league. So I know it's not a finished product in Jacksonville. I'm sure the next time they meet, if they do in the playoffs, they'll be a lot better. But they have a lot of work to do if they want to close that gap with the Kansas City Chiefs. You want to know a wild stat? Since becoming the head coach of the Tennessee Titans, Mike Rabel has won 23 wins as the underdog, and they picked up their 23rd on Sunday against the LA Chargers. And they did this thanks to tough, knows physical football. We know that Mike Rabel's teams are always going to compete, and yet again they did so. I mean, they were down 11-0 early to start this game, and they're at home. A lot of new pieces in this offense and even defensively, but they held tough. They got key stops, and they pulled out a win in overtime. Big kudos to the coaching staff and also just overall for the Tennessee Titans. Ryan Tannehill, as much grief as we give him, he's still a pretty solid quarterback in this league when given time. And he found receivers. He had a rushing touchdown as well. Deceptively fast. I want to say that Ryan Tannehill, a little bit faster than what we think he is. Not saying he's Lamar Jackson by any means, but he's faster than what he looks like. I saw that running touchdown. Was a little surprised there. The Chargers, though, this is another bad start. 0-2. They haven't won since December of 2022. Brandon Staley's seat should be piping hot right now, and he's getting out coached on a weekly basis now. It's 3 weeks in a row, even 4. And one of them was by Nathaniel Hackett. He will be out by the end of the season. The Chargers, they are too talented to be 0-2, and they're too talented to be this sloppy. Justin Herbert gets a lot of grief for what happens for the lack of wins. Ever since entering the league, the Chargers offense has been one of the most potent offenses in the NFL. They score at a highly consistent rate. The only thing is they get outscored because their defense is super leaky. You have names like J.C. Jackson, Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Derwin James. These are great individual pieces, but for whatever reason, they don't mesh well together. This Chargers defense has always been its Achilles heel, and that's what Brandon Staley does. He's a defensive coordinator, or former defensive coordinator from the LA Rams. Back in 2020, once they were looking for a head coach, the Spanos family had an option to pick up Brian Daboll. You know, he's the OC at that point with the Buffalo Bills. Or they decided to go with Brandon Staley. They went with the latter. At the time, it was the cheaper option. They maybe wanted to pluck away a guy from Sean McVay's staff. They're crosstown rivals. But you have to look at offense. I love defensive-minded head coach. I love defense. But right now, the trend is you need offensive-minded coaches, especially when you have a really good, talented quarterback like Justin Herbert. This offense isn't going to be the same. We know that Mike Williams will get hurt eventually. That's just a given. Even Keenan Allen gets hurt every now and then. Austin Eckler missed this game. Their offense is hanging on for dear life to score points, and the defense isn't showing any type of resistance, especially in key moments. They gave up a 27-0 lead against the Jacksonville Jaguars last year, and Staley made a big statement saying that there's no carryover to that. That may or may not be the case. They are not getting it done. They've been a consistently poor team in late game situation that reflects on the coach. And not to beat a dead horse, but it just seems that Brandon Staley's holding this team back. And not to beat a dead horse, don't want anybody to lose their jobs, but when your calling card is defense and they're one of the worst defenses in the NFL, you need to go. So I think the best thing maybe to keep things in-house, you go with Kellen Moore, maybe one of the best new OCs that are on the market next offseason, depending on how it shakes out, because they're wasting the prime of Justin Herbert's career. They need to really maximize it because right now he's heading into those bulky cap numbers, and this division is going to be with Patrick Mahomes for the foreseeable future. He's not leaving the Kansas City Chiefs. You have to find a way to beat the Chiefs. And right now, 0-2, way too talented. They'd be lucky to sniff the playoffs at this moment, but again, a disappointing start for the Los Angeles Chargers. Green Bay went to Atlanta to play the Falcons, and this was one of the more underrated games to start off the season. Jordan Love is coming off that really nice game against the Bears defense. Now we want to know, is that just the Bears defense being putrid, or is Jordan Love actually showing signs that he's the guy? Jordan Love had a pretty solid game again. 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, but the offense collapsed at the worst time possible. When they were up 24-12 entering the fourth quarter, they couldn't get a single first down. 3 and out, and then 4 and out, if you want to coin that phrase. Late game execution is big for quarterbacks in this league, and when you're down just by a single point with the ball, that if you're that guy, that clutch quarterback, you can get the team downfield to get into field goal territory and win the game. they didn't get it done. They didn't gain a single yard. It was also a botched issue where he was trying to quarterback sneak it and false started himself. I've never seen a quarterback do that. I'm not going to pound on Jordan Love too much, but there was this lack of execution, late game situations. The defense has been pretty good, but they didn't finish the deal either. There was a lot of missed opportunities. You saw Jair Alexander drop what looked like to be a pick six. Quay Walker, who had an interception last week, dropped an easy interception. And there were opportunities to get off the field, but they couldn't. This Atlanta Falcons team, though, I think is something to be noticed. Their running game is looking really dynamic. Last week it was Tyler Algier. This week it was Bijan Robinson, over 100 yards on the ground. And when he's getting the ball in space, he makes plays. Drake London had a pretty solid game as well. We're liking how that connection between him and Desmond Ridder is looking so far this year. I like what I see out of Atlanta. I mean, Arthur Smith was facing a make or break year. I mean, first 2 years, I know it was a revolving door of quarterbacks between an aging Matt Ryan. You have a young quarterback who's pretty raw coming out of Cincinnati, but this time you've surrounded him with pretty decent talent. They have a really good offensive line. Defensively, of course, I think they still have some things to work on, but right now, it's a nice start. Now, Atlanta does play Detroit next week, and that's a matchup of two of these younger up-and-coming teams. We didn't have a lot of expectations for the Atlanta Falcons, but Detroit, we did. If they are able to be competitive or even beat Detroit, I'm going to be pretty impressed to start off this year for the Atlanta Falcons, and they could be a playoff contending team. In last year's matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Seattle Seahawks, it was complete barn burn. I mean, a total shootout. We saw both teams light it up offensively, and this time we got it on a smaller scale. Still a very high scoring affair, and I didn't talk about Seattle last week, but they dropped their opening game against the LA Rams. Obviously, that defensive front for the LA Rams made their impact known and bottled up that Seattle offense. But this time they responded. I was very impressed by Geno Smith and his ability to respond on the road. He led a masterful drive in overtime to get them the win, and it's a much needed win because going down 0-2, not an ideal start to start off your season. But this time, got the job done. Very impressed with how Geno Smith has done, because when he is using play action, he's one of the best passers in the league. Very accurate, made a lot of good passes, especially to Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and that was overcoming a poor output from the running game. They didn't get much on the run. I was surprised that Detroit was falling for these play fakes so often because they were doing a good job in shutting down the run, so they should be playing a little bit further back. But Geno's fakes were so deceptive. Let Geno have that extra time using play action. I like what I saw out of Detroit despite the loss. Now, there was that pick six by Jared Goff. That can't happen. That ball placement has to be on the front, on that left shoulder compared to that right hip, and that allowed the defensive back to get in and take that back all the way to the house. But overall, still a pretty solid season to start off. Not a lot from the run game this week, but passing game looks very crisp. We saw a lot of Josh Reynolds, and shout out to Sam Laporta. I mean, Laporta is a tight end I think that Detroit is going to continue to utilize for the foreseeable future. I think he has what it takes to be a top 5 tight end in the future. Very good piece right there for that Detroit passing attack to go along with their very good offensive line, their backs, and their receivers. Now, like I said, turnovers are a big thing. They had 3, 2 had big implications that led to points being scored directly off of them. So they're going to have to clean that up. I still think that they're favorites to win this NFC North division. They have a leg up on their divisional foes. They just have to figure a way to execute late. They got those wins against Rodgers and Mahomes, but those are two different teams. You have to win on a consistent basis. I didn't expect them to run the table and be undefeated, but there's some things to clean up. San Francisco has beaten LA in 9 straight regular season matchups. Now, the big matchup, of course, was in that 2021 NFC Championship game where LA won en route to their Super Bowl win. San Francisco has yet to win a Super Bowl in that time span. So I think regardless of the regular season dominance, it still favors LA because they got the championship. Now, still regular season, they dominated yet again. I think these Niners yet again are primed for a deep run. Brock Purdy, building off of that pretty good performance last week, looked in command of the offense yet again. A lot of nice looks. And then Christian McCaffrey as well, getting in on the action with a powerful run. You can see that he is getting more physical as a runner. He's put on weight, not quite that finesse player that we're used to. He's able to lower the shoulder, and he does a lot of work in the gym. He's very swole. So I think that's paying off for the San Francisco 49ers. And there's just so many weapons. Today was a Debo day. Last week was an Ayuk day. Maybe it'll be a George Kittle day because I need that in my fantasy team. That's my bad for picking him, I guess. But still, a lot of weapons for the San Francisco 49ers offense. And defensively, again, they forced timely turnovers. They got Lenore in on the action for the Matt Stafford interception. Just did what they needed to do to get the win. Now, the final margin was 30-23. Reason why it's like that is because despite them only having 3 seconds, Sean McVay and the Rams elected to kick a field goal, and the final margin, instead of being 10, was 7. And for all my bettors out there, not a gambler, but definitely swayed a lot of bets out there whether or not they would cover or not. So I'm sure that a lot of bettors out there are disappointed by that final margin. For the Niners, as long as their quarterback, Brock Purdy, or even their backup is remotely healthy and competent, they should be a title contender because this offense is so talented, so deep, and this team is also very loaded. The Rams still have some things to work on. They are missing Cooper Kupp, their best offensive talent, but in his place, Puka Nacua, unknown commodity, has come onto the scene and has caught pretty much everything within his catch radius, setting a record for most catches in 2 regular season games to start off his career, and looking like a Cooper Kupp clone. I know Cooper is a little bit more versatile because he's veteran at this point, so maybe he'll shift around in different formations. Just getting him the ball in space is a big thing because he's a great route runner. But this offense for the Rams is still a work in progress. The good thing is that they have some youth now with all these younger draft picks. We're already hearing that they're gearing up for 2024, whatever it may be. Maybe it's tanking for Caleb Williams. Maybe it's getting some money because right now they're eating dead cap for a lot of these players that they've either cut or traded, whatever it is. And then finally they get their first round draft pick for the first time in 8 years, and they get some cap room. Next year in 2024, they could be back in playoff contention pending the right moves. The New York Jets are trying to navigate life without Aaron Rodgers. Now, if this is their quarterback play that they're going to be getting for the foreseeable future, it's going to be a long season because, yet again, Zach Wilson looked like a deer in headlights. Now, they go up against the Dallas defense that is kind of the doomsday defense of the 70s reincarnated, led by Micah Parsons. Great edge rusher there, had another sack, and they forced a bevy of turnovers. I mean, a strip on Dalvin Cook. They had issues with, they forced Zach Wilson into 3 interceptions as well. Just totally bottled up the running game. Now, the weird thing is for the New York Jets is that they're trying to put Zach Wilson in Aaron Rodgers' shoes and utilize him like how they would Aaron Rodgers. That's not the way to do it. I know Nathaniel Hackett is an Aaron Rodgers guy, but he has to find a way to utilize Zach Wilson's strengths. That's what an OC does here. Zach is a limited quarterback at this moment. You have to lean on this running game. I know the offensive line isn't that great. Last week against the Bills, they were pretty good. I mean, Breece Hall went over 100 yards and had an 83-yard scamper. This time, he only gets 4 touches, and immediately after the game, voices his frustrations about the lack of touches. And I understand that. I mean, I understand that you are coming back from an ACL injury and you want to be worked into the offense slowly but surely. But it seems that the best way to do it is just to give him more carries. Obviously, not too many because you have Dalvin Cook as well in the backfield, but Breece Hall is a very good quality back when given opportunities. And 4 touches isn't enough. And for the Jets defense, schematically, it just was a head-scratching move. You have Sauce Gardner, and in their one target that they tried on his side against CeeDee Lamb, it was nearly a pick 6, should have been a pick 6. And CeeDee Lamb continued to burn other DBs not named Sauce Gardner. If you want to be one of the best cornerbacks in the league, you have to travel. Darrelle Revis did that. That was a big knock against Richard Sherman. Yeah, you can take away one side of the field, but a lot of quarterbacks go to their best receiver despite wherever they may be. If you travel, they're not going to have that option, that luxury. So I know operating the slot, something that CD likes to do a lot, is not easy for those bigger corners like Sauce, but lining up against him, going every which way where those best receivers are, is going to add on to his resume. Is another skill that he can do. And that's something that the defensive coordinator for the New York Jets has to do. The defensive line, for the most part, played a pretty good part. I mean, they stopped the run for the most part, but they got gashed on play action and also the passing game. Dak Prescott is off to a pretty good start. Not asked to do a lot, but he had an opening start of 13 for 13. High completion percentage to start off this year, really in command of this offense. And if he's not asked to do a lot, he's not going to turn the ball over. First 2 games, 0 turnovers. That's all you need, because they're going to ride this dominant defense until they actually get some quality opponent offensively. And if you see their schedule coming up, they have a chance to really make a run until that matchup against the San Francisco 49ers in October. A lot of quarterbacks, a lot of mediocre teams right there. And that's the thing with Dallas. They beat those mediocre bad teams to a pulp, but it matters how they look against the San Franciscos, those Philadelphia Eagles as well. Now the NFC, it's really just the Eagles, the Cowboys, and the San Francisco 49ers, and they play the Eagles twice, they play the Niners once. I'm not saying that's their immediate source of losses right there. They'll definitely drop a game or two to other opponents, but they're looking really good. I mean, one of the best opening statements in the first 2 games. They are undefeated against New York, outscoring them 70-10 in 2 games. That's a dominant start. But I need to see more against these elite teams. But I will give Mike McCarthy credit here. We give Mike McCarthy the worst criticism, and that's warranted when they come up short. But right now they're winning. Right now they're executing. Dak Prescott is in command. He looks confident in making the right reads, not trying to do too much. And maybe that's with this new adjustment with Mike McCarthy calling plays and also coaching him up as the de facto offensive coordinator. But a lot of things still left to be seen with this Dallas team. But right now, I mean, in terms of power rankings, I think they would be atop the NFL. The Washington Commanders have started off the season 2-0 with a win against the Denver Broncos, and this drops Sean Payton's team to 0-2. Now, in the first half, they looked great. They were up 21-3, really utilizing that Russell Wilson moonball game that we knew and loved when he played for Seattle. Connected with Mims for a couple deep passes, and really in command of that offense. Looked like what we used to see out of him in Seattle. But remember, when you get those 15-20 scripted plays, rest of the game comes on quarterback play, not just coaching. And that's when Russell and the offense kind of turned back into a pumpkin. After the 21-3 start, they only scored 12 points the rest of the game. A lot of missed opportunities and also turnovers. There was a Russell Wilson turnover, and then defensively, they're just not looking like a good unit. Let's give some credit to the Commanders. I mean, Sam Howell in 2 starts looks very good. Some of the most consistent quarterback play we've seen maybe since Kirk Cousins was leading this team. Just a yard shy of a 300-yard passing day, 2 touchdown passes, and a great snag by Terry McLaurin in, I think, triple coverage. If they're doing this on a consistent basis with Eric Bieniemy calling plays, which something to be noticed with, I think this team could be something to be reckoned with, because they're not just a walkover team in the NFC East. They could be a playoff team, because that defense as well with Chase Young, who was a defensive rookie of the year 3 years ago, and then the last 2 years riddled with injuries. And this year, making his season debut in week 2, had 1.5 sacks, and that goes on with 7 total sacks for the entirety of the game. Montez Sweat, 1.5 sacks, and then Deron Payne as well. Those 2 guys have held down the fort in Chase Young's absence. And if you have 3 pass rushers that are in that 7 to 8 sack range for the yearly output, that's a pretty good D-line right there. I mean, Deron Payne already been a Pro Bowler, and Montez Sweat has been on the fringe of that as well, flirting with a couple of 10-sack seasons. But we'll see if they continue this, but I'm very impressed with what I see out of Washington right now. Now, they almost gave away this game. They allowed Russell Wilson and the Broncos to score a touchdown as time expired. Now, the problem is they came off a Hail Mary, and they needed a 2-point conversion. Now, we can talk about the DPI missed until the cows come home, but it was called no DPI on the field. It remained that way. There's no way to review it. And the Commanders walk away 2-0, a tough win on the road, off to a great start. Now, next week they play the Buffalo Bills. That's a prove-it game. That's a highly potent offense that responded, beat up on the Vegas Raiders this week. They'll have a pretty big test against the Bills. I'm excited to see how they match up, and if this front can get home and force mistakes out of Josh Allen next week. For the Broncos, I think this team is in for a long season. I hate to say it, but Sean Payton may not have the patience to deal with Russell Wilson's regression. It just seems like something is off. He's playing older, whereas other quarterbacks are maybe playing younger, like Tom Brady did. It's just not looking good. Outside of those scripted plays that I talked about, there was just too many times that it took too long for plays to develop. Not a lot of consistency and decisiveness with the ball. A lot of lack of execution. There was a red zone play where he fired the ball too hard and it landed incomplete. If Russ doesn't improve it, they're already 0-2, not looking good to start off. They can change that, of course. Could mean that Denver and Russell Wilson could be on the way to a divorce. The Miami Dolphins and the New England Patriots went head-to-head on Sunday Night Football, and Patriots are coming off a tough loss at home against the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Dolphins are coming off of a great road win against the LA Chargers, and I'm very impressed with how they're just so fast. I mean, either Tyreek gets loose, and this time it was Raheem Mostert that sprinted ahead of the New England defense, who is pretty good, but they just don't have the speed. I think they're more of that power team, and if they can't corral you early, they're just going to get outpaced, and that's what we saw. And a lot of teams are going to get outpaced by the Miami Dolphins. And we know that Tua is looking pretty good to start off this season, but it's more than that because this O-line has generated space for not just Raheem Mostert, but their other backs as well. Ahmed has looked very good in place of Jeff Wilson, who's injured to start off this year, and I think he might get as the season progresses because we know that Raheem Mostert has an injury issue. Now, for the Patriots, they just look outdated. They have improvements offensively, but they just depend on this defense to just hold down the fort and get stops, either kicks or field goals, not touchdowns. They're just this bend but don't break type of team. And they broke early, and then they bent a few times, got them back in the game, but this timely turnovers by this Patriot offense wasn't able to see this through. It seems like Bill Belichick may be on the way out, or should be on the way out. He made a great play in terms of special teams using this weird motion trick to block a field goal. That's just typical Belichick, knowing ins and outs, the little technicalities in the playbook. Great play. Maybe if he just is back to being a defensive coordinator, that might be something, but he's not going to stop being a head coach. That's long forgone. I think, though, management has to look and say, like, look, Bill, our offense hasn't been the same since Tom Brady has left. We tried it with Mac. We still like Mac, but we don't like you and what your decisions are with this team. You've missed on countless drafts. You haven't found a good receiver in several years, and that was partially why Tom Brady left. It just looks like this team, despite all the adjustments they made, Bill O'Brien has made new implements into this offense, but they need an offensive-minded head coach. They need some fresh sense to help Mac Jones and also just help this team offensively. They have a lot of gimmicky stuff, but it's not enough to compete with these higher tier teams, especially on the offensive side. Now, it's going to be a huge ask because Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick have been close for 20 plus years. To ask the best coach ever to resign or retire is huge. But it may come down to that because they just look outdated. They look like a Neanderthal amongst a group of Homo sapiens. They look outdated and unevolved. I have some things to work on, but as much as I like Bill Belichick, I think it might be best that he steps down as head coach of the New England Patriots by the end of this season. And that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. Thank you as always for tuning in. Greatly appreciated. Please do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. Links for clips from this episode can be found on those two platforms, and the playlist is also made as well. And you can get the audio from this episode on Spotify. All links are in the description. Thank you, Joy, for editing this. And until next time, goodbye.